So good morning, everybody. It's Steve Armstrong of stephenarmstrong.ca here. And this is the 21st of December of 2023, which I fully expected when I said that is that we would have jetpacks by now, because that's what the Boys Cat magazine told me back in 1960. And here we are still walking around like we haven't quite evolved fully yet. So I'm a bit disappointed about that part of 2023, but that's okay. It's a beautiful, glorious spring day in Calgary, even though it's the equinox, winter equinox, and it's just above zero and blue skies, and everybody's happy here, although it's a weird winter for the weather. And we have a special better inner circle session today. Is that we have a guest, and we don't often have guests, but we're excited to have this one because he's a great friend. And I was thinking about my friend Hugh Culver this morning, and I was thinking, I think we probably met in 2007 or 8 on the top of the COP Olympic ski jump, what made the Jamaican bobsled team famous, partly back in the 88 Olympics, but afterwards it was turned into a conference center. And not only Hugh is one of those guys who I used to always be irritated by, because he's good looking and he's handsome and he's fit, he's super smart and super charming, but we managed to stay friends all those years despite my envy. But the most impressive part of Hugh was that day I was not looking forward to it, because our boss at the time had brought this guest speaker in, this performance guy, this time management guy, come and talk to us about how to make sure that our lives are simple and that we could get more work done. And I wasn't super excited about it, but my boss said we were doing it, so off we went. And it was Hugh. And Hugh shared some information that day about how to organize your day and your life and your calendar and your email, that from 2007 or 8, whenever that was, to this very same day, I use a number of things he taught us that day. And I don't know how much time and energy and frustration he saved me in doing that. So he's quite a remarkable guy. He's been everywhere from the Antarctic to Everest to all across Canada. He's a super successful speaker and consultant and educator. And he's just an all-around really great guy. So welcome, Hugh, to the club.
Wow, thanks, Steve. Are we done? That was
I could go on and on and on, but no, I think that's enough. People are probably starting to think that I'm just blowing sunshine on you. But yeah, it's great to have you here, and welcome to everybody, new and old, to the Inner Circle, the Better Leader Inner Circle. It's a lot of people are subscription members, but every once in a while we open it up to other people, and that's terrific that we allow them to see what behind the curtains about how we help people become better leaders. And we have, if you don't mind, if you're out there and listening in, if you just jump in the top chat box for a minute, just type where you're at, where are you now today, and what's going on in the weather, and how you're feeling. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Hugh if he's got any introductory thoughts that to share while we're getting organized for the next step.
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. So, hello, everyone. Nice to meet all these nice folks. And I know that you're here because you know Steve, and that to me already means you're a pretty special person. I was working on a blog this morning, and I find that whenever I sit down to write, it changes my way of thinking because I have to get organized. You can't just have a whole bunch of miscellaneous notes and present that as anything that's very coherent or attractive to a reader. And I was looking at categories of my life that reflect how I would summarize 2023. And there's 4 that I came up with. I mean, there's many other topics. We all get involved with so many different things in a year, but I summarized it down to 4 things that I think that I want to reflect on, but also look forward to working on more in 2024. And those were relationships. So the people in my world, the people in my circle of influence, as they call it, the people that I help out, obviously family, and where am I at with that? The second one was creativity or being creative. I love doing things that have an end result. So building something, even whether it's fixing something around my home, or it's resolving an issue with the board of directors that I'm on, or it's some kind of art project or stuff. So for some strange reason, I started cartooning a year ago. Actually, I started at the beginning of the pandemic, and they're very amateurish, but it's a way for me to take an idea out of my head and put it into something that I can actually share. So relationships, being creative. The third one was what I call minding the store, and that's really around taking care of money, finances, taking care of our investments. Even things like looking at, where are we spending our money? And the fourth one was giving back. So how is it that, I can actually share my knowledge, but also my energy and my resources with other groups. So yeah, so that's what's on my mind today is those four categories. And I think that maybe as we look at how we want to spend our time on this call, I would encourage you to be thinking about categories in your life. I think all too often we just have lots of miscellaneous thoughts going on or big long lists. But I find that if you can just get things into categories, it's a lot easier to focus on, where is it I need to put some attention.
Thanks, Hugh. Thank you for that. And I'd encourage everybody, if you're not talking, just to mute yourself. But if you have a thought or a question, or you want to go a little deeper on something, this is a bit of a free-flowing exercise. Most of our programs are a little more structured, where we have a lesson. Usually I tell a big long war story that everybody seems to excite, because most of the people that know me well are sick of my war stories and my tales of adventure. And then that frames a leadership lesson, and then we often have a discussion as it goes. But this morning is because we have a guest and we have some new people joining us this morning. I'd like it just to be a pretty casual conversation. It's not hundreds of people, it's 20 or 25 people. So I think it's a good opportunity. Fortunately, I can't mute myself. So if you hear Walter the Wonder Dog snoring behind me, I said I may not be able to filter that out. So you tell me a story you've had an amazing adventure. I don't want to go I don't want to make it all about Hugh, but so what are some of the things in your past that you have sort of experienced, some of the big adventures you've been on, and some of just the life lessons that you learned over the last few years that have got you to this place where even cartooning has been a release, maybe a release, and you're thinking about life in general and these categories you're thinking about, and as we go forward
Yeah.
into 2024.
Well, if I could, I'll tell you a story. And then what I'd like to do is sort of reverse engineer that story and talk about how the story happened and my lessons from that story. So I used to do a lot of running. I've been running for many years. Like I'm sure lots of you, there was a time in your life when you could do anything and nothing hurt and nothing, nothing swelled up afterwards. And, and you could actually walk the next day. And so I used to do a lot of competitions in running and endurance events, but then I took a huge gap when the kids were growing up and they were at home and life got busy and I had my own businesses. But last year I was listening to CBC and they were interviewing Melinda Elmore. So I live in Kelowna, British Columbia. Melinda Elmore is kind of one of our local heroes because she is this very successful marathon runner and marathon coach. And last year in April, she had just returned from Boston, running Boston, and she came in 11th in women, which is amazing. Boston has over 32,000 competitors every year. And obviously the best in the world come to run Boston. It's one of the premier running events in the world. Has anybody on this call done Boston, or anybody done a marathon race? Well, there are a couple of you, yeah. So, to run Boston's kind of a big deal because it's one of the big sixes in the world, but it's also the one that is probably the most prestigious. It's also the oldest. And here's Melinda at the age of 42, and she came in 11th. So pretty remarkable, and she qualified for Tokyo. And I'm in my car driving around and I'm thinking, well, here I go listening to another story of someone who's pretty amazing and thinking to myself, isn't that great? And then it dawned on me, why don't I do that? Like, why don't I go run Boston? And then what happened, of course, was what normally happens when we think of something really big that we haven't done before is all the reasons why not came into my mind. Well, you haven't been really running much for 12 years and you haven't done this, and Boston's a long ways off. And then I started to think, well, what would happen if I did do Boston and how would I do it? So I did some research. I found a qualifying race. I signed up for the qualifying race. I ran a local half marathon. And fast forward, I ran Boston this year on my 65th birthday. And so when I think back to, and by the way, I've already qualified for next year, and I've decided now I'm going to run it every year for 5 years. But when I think back to, okay, well, how did I go from listening to CBC radio, Sarah Penton talking to Melinda Elmore, to running Boston Marathon exactly a year later? And it's all, to me, all about how we approach what we want in life. And would it be okay, Stephen? Would it be okay if I share the screen?
Absolutely, Hugh. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let
I
me.
think you have all the power you need to do that.
Okay, all right. This might be helpful if I share this because um, I ended up spending a lot of time Oh, okay. Just 1 second. I spent a lot of time thinking about how is it in my life that um, I make big things happen, but also what is it that gets in my way of big things happening? And the concept that I want to look at first of all with you is, how is it that we think about things in the future? So maybe already here you are in December the 21st, and you're thinking about things you want to do next year. So you should be able to see everybody.
Looks good out from this.
Everybody can see that screen?
Yep, I can, Hugh.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think that, Steve and I were talking about this recently. Maybe you're training, or you've read some self-help book or whatever, or you've gotten advice from a friend, and you have this concept in mind around how to tackle big things in your life. And it looks something like this. You think, okay, well, I'm going to have this unbelievably accurate, beautiful vision in the future. I'm going to, go on this amazing trip. I'm going to learn this second language. I'm going to go and, invest in this incredible property, or I'm going to go and lose 10 pounds or whatever it is. And then you think, okay, well, here I am now with full information of who I am and my strengths and my weaknesses and all of my, preconditioned biases and history. And it's going to be basically like this, right? Then you think, well, that's all I got to do. And self-help books will tell you that, look, it's not that hard. Here's a timeline, and all you've got to do is you just go and develop some healthy habits, and Bob's your uncle, and then you get your vision. Well, like, world doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that. It never works in a straight line. And what starts to happen then is we start to get discouraged because we think, well, that's not, I'm not capable of that, or I'm really good at coming up with ideas, but not so great at executing the ideas. Or you think that, well, actually something has to happen first. As soon as something happens, then I'll be more capable. And I think that the reality is that, first of all, we have this sort of, we don't really have a vision, but we have over here is sort of like a wish. And this wish is confused by all sorts of things that, like, we're not very clear about what we want. We're not really clear why we want it. We're not really sure how that will be accepted or seen by other people. Sometimes we even believe that that will make us less attractive in our group because we'll now stand out. So we get confused with the value of that wish or even what it looks like. And over here, we have this sort of confused vision of who we are and what we're capable of. And that's confused because of the things that people tell us, the things that we tell ourselves, the things that we read, the distractions in our life, and all of these other things get in our way. And also when we take a journey it's never a straight line. And so we get discouraged. And I think that this kind of repeats itself. And once it repeats itself, we get into this cycle of, well, there's things that I think I'd like to do in my life, like next year in 2024, but it never really works out. And so I don't really want to set my sights too high. And so we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot before we even get started. And that's kind of where I was at. I thought, well, who am I to go run Boston Marathon if I haven't been running for 12 years? And plus, I don't even know what the experience would be like and whether I'd like it or not, or whether I get injured or something like that. But the funny thing is that once I did it and executed it, it seemed so simple. To look back at it, it just seemed like it was actually a series of steps. So what I started to think about was, well, how can I create more success in my life, even though I know that this sort of pattern is going to try and get in my way? Does that pattern seem familiar to any of you? Just, go ahead and put a reaction on the screen or whatever. Does that pattern seem familiar, where you sort of start to cut yourself down before you even get started? You start to question these desires, these wishes, these visions in the future? Yeah, and it's kind of human nature. So I started to research this concept of small wins. And eventually, I was asked to present a number of organizations, and I started to put this into a package and start to explain it and start to learn more about how that works in life. And when I look back at how is it I went from listening to Sarah Penton interviewing Melinda Elmore on the radio to actually standing at the start line of the Boston Marathon almost exactly a year later, I realized it was a series of small wins. And so a small win, and this is actually comes from research done by a Harvard professor named Teresa Amibil, who looked at what she called the inner work experience. So what she was curious about was, what is it that motivates people at work? And I think the assumption that she and her researchers had going into the project was that what motivated people was, obviously who you're working with, the kind of projects you're involved with, and your remuneration, and whether or not these successes are celebrated, and a lot of the things that we would normally associate with motivation. And what they did was they had all of these diary entries, over 12,000 of them, submitted from 26 different companies and all these different industries, so they could actually analyze what is the experience that people are having day after day after day. And what they discovered was that the biggest motivator was not any of those things that I mentioned. What do you think the biggest motivator is for people in the workplace? Just go in the chat box and see. Just give me an idea. What do you think motivates people the most in the workplace?
I'll keep an eye on it for you, Hugh, if you like.
Yeah.
Other people.
Okay. Like I would have thought it would be,
Appreciation, joy.
people, the kind of work I'm doing, right?
Yeah. I like the joy one. Comes from the elf. That's nice.
Yeah.
More
It turns out,
recognition, contribution to a purpose, relationships.
it's progress.
Oh, interesting.
Progress is the biggest motivator. So feeling like I am moving forward. So feeling like I'm getting closer to my vision. This makes me motivated. I am motivated because I'm making progress. It's not that those other aspects don't motivate us, but they don't motivate us as much as the feeling like I'm actually moving forward. And you've experienced this, probably every day you experience this. You experience this when you feel like you're getting a little better at your work, or you're getting a little better in communication with a difficult, direct report. You feel like you're getting a little bit better at keeping a promise, that you've got, as far as, showing up on time for meetings, or keeping a promise as far to yourself as far as your diet or your exercise. That's progress. And what I realized is that the reason I went from CBC, listening to CBC to Boston Marathon, was just because I was making progress, constantly making progress in these small advances. And so when we think about the things in 2024 that we want to do, what I would really encourage you to start thinking about is, well, how could I set this up so I can see that I have made progress? How can I set it up so I can see that I'm moving forward? And there's three things I think that are really important to make this happen. The first is we have to be really aware of where we're at. So what is it I really want? When do I want it? And how am I going to get there? So what, when, how? So what is it that I really want? So what is this thing? So I find it really useful, as I said earlier, to break things down into titles and definitions. So I'm looking at last year and I'm breaking it down into categories. Well, what is it in the future you want? And can you put some definition around that? Like, for example, it's one thing to say, oh, I want to be healthier. I want to take better care of myself. I want to be happier at work. I want to travel more. But none of that has any specificity to it. None of that has any definition to it. It's like if Melinda Elmore said, gee, I just want to run faster. Well, that's not, there's no definition. There's nothing to measure against. So the first thing is you got to be really aware of what you want, but equally you got to be aware of who you are. So what is it that you are really good at? What is it you need to improve at? I think the reason why there's so many bestseller books out now about things like habits and about how to be happier and how to have a more fulfilling life is because we're not very skilled at how to create that on our own. I think it's really important to understand how to change your thinking so you can actually change your results. The second thing is that you need to ask better questions. So as I said earlier, I think a lot of the reason why we get stuck is because we're asked the wrong questions. So we ask questions like, why am I always doing that? Why are they always doing that? Why does this always happen? And so it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're asking questions that actually continue to give us answers that we already have, which is explaining why we do what we do. And what we want is to ask better questions. So how could I? So the secret to small wins is it's all about better questions. So how could I? What would be one thing? What is one thing that would make a difference? Like we all know that little things like making your bed in the morning, little things like, keeping a promise to yourself, little things like building a new habit and then growing that habit. These things teach us that we're capable of changing our behavior and our outcomes. And the way that those happen is we just ask better questions. Like, what would be one thing I'd have to do? So what would be one thing I'd have to do to be able to think more clearly? What would be one thing I'd have to do so that my day is not so distracted, full of distractions? What would be one thing I'd have to do so that, my phone doesn't run my life? And then the third thing would be to act. And what I mean by act is taking a specific, definite, measurable step that's a small win. So what would be one thing that I could do that actually moves me forward? So I think that, it's as simple as this seems, it's to me a formula for how I can move forward in my life. Gary Keller, who wrote the bestseller, The One Thing with Jay Papasan, he has this great line. He says, great success is achieved by allocating time every day to becoming great. Great success is achieved by allocating time every day to becoming great. In other words, just simply looking at what are my habits, what are my behaviors, what are my patterns, and how can I tweak that just a little bit so that I can get a little bit more of what I want and a little bit less of what I don't want, so that I'm not doing the whole Groundhog Day thing all the time. I'm actually changing, my behavior, but also changing my trajectory.
So Hugh, I'm going to ask people to wade in here to unmute yourself. And if you got a question, it seems like a good spot to maybe pose a couple of questions. But I think while the audience is thinking about what you said, I'm involved with a number of these people in different regards, and a lot of us are doing strategic planning organizationally. And so there's this personal improvement and setting yourself up. But you grew three businesses and you've worked with a lot of corporations and companies on making them better. How would this apply to the strategic planning session where you have this lofty goal in the future. I remember I worked for Red Cross. Our lofty goal was world peace. Well, that's kind of hard
Yeah.
to achieve, and
Right.
some of our organizations are big and they have big lofty goals, but it's translating that down to your model that you're discussing here a wee bit. And then
Well,
I would encourage anyone either to when he was thinking about this or responding,
yeah.
either jump in the
Mhm.
chat box or just unmute yourself and feel free to interrupt and ask questions.
Well, yeah, maybe a question I would put out to the group is, so when you're thinking about strategic planning or any kind of sort of organizational improvement like that, like what is it that fails? Like what is it that sometimes frustrates that process? What is it that doesn't seem to work?
Any ideas from the group? What's something that tripped you up on either if I'm not asking anybody to share anything too personal, but
Yeah.
in your own personal progression or organizational progression, what's a trip line that you could pose to Hugh and maybe we could case
Yeah.
study it a wee bit?
John, you
One
want to
thing
answer?
I've found in the past is, when you have a group of people, I mean, you've got multiple unconscious biases that are going on in their heads. And so it's, we tried that before, it's not going to work again, or, that's the
Mm,
process. You've got to break that thought pattern all the time.
Right.
And I found that, you got to get those on the table first
Yes.
and then break them down.
Yeah.
And that way now you've got clear runway to now start building on top of those things that people, were thinking about as a negative. I'm going to call it a negative
yeah.
because that's what they are. And how do you bring that positive piece and spin as to really understanding that, we can do this. It's the elephant theory, right? You just don't have to eat the whole elephant today. We
Right.
just take the bits and pieces we all know and understand so that we can get some motivation, get the trajectory starting to happen so that then the other parts start to happen as well.
So
That's really good.
interesting. I heard a pod just this morning, actually, there was one of the podcasts I listened to, and somebody was talking about calling themselves an effing arsehole because they made a mistake at work or said something wrong, and they come home and they were complaining about themselves, being quite denigrating to themselves, and their spouse or partner said, if I ever heard someone talk like that to you on the street, I'd punch them right in the mouth. And it was his own voice, right? And sometimes it's
That's really good.
those internal things, like you say, John, that trip us up, even in our own head or in our organizations, our culture, or whatever it might be. Hugh, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think like John, that's a perfect example. And I find that for many years, I was a facilitator of these sessions and I would come in and I loved trying to tackle all these different biases that are in the room and respecting them as well. And I think that if anything works, one thing that does seem to work is to listen really, really carefully, of course, acknowledge what you're hearing so they feel really heard and respected, and then move it to a parking lot and then get back to the agenda. Because oftentimes what can actually sidetrack the whole process is we spend a lot of time thinking about this one person's opinion or their experience. And often what can happen is if you put that into a parking lot and then continue on with the agenda, that it actually can resolve itself. So better information can come up or people can come back to that and refer to it. And you know all that, but it is something that's inevitable, is that people are going to enter the room actually with, they're not on board and they're not singing the same song you're singing.
Yeah. I see Jake had a comment, Hugh. I don't know if you can see it about
Right.
about people, organizations, or I think you mean organizations too, but sometimes even human people personally, they're too rigid or too general, not specific, lack of clarity on the true
Clarity.
purpose, alignment on purpose.
Yeah, and Jake, to that point, like one of the things, just kind of looping back to what I was talking about earlier, is what I would try and do is identify the small wins that are possible and maybe even set that as a challenge to the group is, well, how can we turn this into a small win? I find stories are really powerful in these examples. So it doesn't have to be a Boston Marathon story, but something where you've experienced a small win in your personal life. And you can say, here's something that I took as a big goal and I broke it down, and then how can we do that here? And I think that just kind of setting that as an expectation is that whatever we put up on the flip chart, whatever ends up on the spreadsheet, we need to find some small wins to kind of get the flywheel going. So that people start to understand that that's actually a part of our planning process, is that we need to always break things down so that with the goal being, we can actually see progress. So how do we see progress early on?
Go ahead, Nicole.
I have a question for you, sort of feeding off of Jake's comment about, you know, not being specific, and then and Denise saying lack of connection, and your original question, which was like, what gets in your own way? And what do you do when you find your small wins, and in fact, somebody just uses that concrete piece of information as the way to say no? You know, because when it's a big concept, it's hard to say no because no one has any like ownership or anything. But then the minute you start to get down to some of your smaller actual things, your barriers now become no. Like, I don't do that. I don't want to do that. I don't believe in that. And so how do you get past that so that you can actually have the win be small, but like mighty, and impact more than one person?
Yeah, I think, well, Nicole, if I understand what you're talking about, I think so you've got like one person that's basically saying, no, that's not possible. That's not going to happen. You know, there's a really great book. He's by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. I don't know if you've heard of it. So Chris Voss is this remarkable fellow who is considered to be the world's like #1 hostage negotiator. And here's an example where someone who's completely out of the business world has actually written a really powerful business book. And he talks about these kind of examples. Like, he talks about, obviously, as a negotiator, he's up against people that have completely the opposite objective that you do. And how do we move that forward? And when he talks about never split the difference, what he means is don't compromise. Don't just go 50-50, right? It's like, it doesn't really work. It's not like, you know, you got a whole bunch of people that are robbing a bank and they got hostages, and you know, you're saying, okay, I'm happy if you just give me 4 of them. You know, there's 8 people, but give me 4 and I'm happy. So, you know, what he would do is he would throw it back at that person and get them to explain, well, then how are we going to make this happen? So in other words, if we've agreed on the overall objective, don't try to debate with that person whether they're right or they're wrong. Just ask them, well, how are we going to make that happen? And put it on them to explain to you how to make it happen. Because there must be some underlying goal you both agree with, which is whatever. We're growing the organization, we're increasing the talent level of our team, we're reducing costs. There must be something you agree on. So then turn it back to that person and say, well, I understand that you're saying this, this, and this. So make sure they feel fully heard, and then ask them, well, how do you think we can make this happen? I mean, it sounds kind of like you're sidestepping it, but you're not actually. You're making them work harder to try and explain themselves.
Well, I think it also gives them ownership, right? And so it's more than just being heard. It now brings it back to, okay, if you don't think those steps are the right steps, what are your thoughts? What do you think are the right steps? And then there's a little bit of that ownership of like, well, here's what I think. And I'm like, I'll always listen. But, you know, I need to know why your thought is different than what we all just talked about, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I like that. Don't
Yeah.
compromise. Thank you.
There's to build a wee bit on that. I'm going to step away from the camera for a moment and see if I can find the copy of the book. I think it's called Grow the Pie. It's a simple, and what this person has done as a negotiator in business is, okay, these are the things we agree on. This is how we split this thing. So for example, one example uses quite a scope for us, I assume, is in growth. If you take over another organization, you can assume that there's like maybe an 80-20 split between the two organizations that come together. But if you only focus on that, then how do you focus on what it becomes in the future. And maybe that's a 50-50 split as opposed to that 80-20, because you'll always feel like you're losing out if every other decision is based on that original split of the organization, right? Or a split of what you want, or that agreement that Hugh says. So maybe we are at 80-20 or 60-40, and we agree on that. So then what do we have left over to talk about, and how do we come to terms with that? And another great quote that many of you have heard from me, it was General Norman Schwarzkopf, was the commander of the coalition forces in the first Gulf War in the early 90s in Kuwait and Iraq, or Iran. No, Iraq. But anyways, his comment was, your decision, the quality of your decision never improves past 75% of the information. And I find that most of us work to drive to 100% of the information, but there comes a point where you know enough to make a good decision.
That's
And
good.
yeah.
That's good. Yeah. There's Nicole, I was just listening to here where Steve and I were talking about podcasts. I was at the gym yesterday listening to this interview with this really remarkable fellow named Hazard Lee. And Hazard's not his real name, but I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's written a best-selling business book, the Wall Street Journal business bestseller. He's a fighter jet pilot from the States, and he's written this business book. But he has this great story where he says that in these $100 million fighter jet planes, $100 million fighter jet planes, with all this unbelievably sophisticated equipment and all this technology, they have a clock that you can wind. And he says it has no purpose. But one of the things that they're trained to do is when everything falls apart and everything is blinking and going crazy, is to reach down and wind the clock. And he says it's to teach you to get present, slow down, and think. One of the lines they use in their business is, he says, there isn't a problem you can't make worse. Isn't that a great line? So it's to slow down, wind the clock, and think. I have a bad habit of speaking too quickly. So someone says something in the room and I immediately react because my brain is, flying, and I've been thinking for days about this and I've been preparing. And then as soon as I hear anything negative that doesn't fit with the song I'm singing in my head, I shoot it down, right? And I need to wind the clock. I need to just wind the clock, breathe, think about it, repeat back what I've heard, and just let it sort of simmer for a bit and take a bit of the energy out of it. But I love that whole notion. There's not a problem we can't make worse. So yeah, just wind the clock.
Yeah, there's a point in your life when you don't have the energy to react quite as hot as maybe you might have.
Right.
That's a lot of work to be mad and pissed off all day long. So I find it's been a bit easier I think there's that other great line that's been around a lot. It's like, are you listening to respond, or are you listening to understand?
Right, that's good.
Yeah.
One of the things years ago I was taught by a brilliant fellow I brought in to a conference I was running is this idea of a plus delta exercise. Maybe I could, Steve, can I just show this?
Yeah, you still have the power there, Hugh. You can.
Okay, all right. It's just a really simple way to kick off a meeting. Let me just go over here and share this again. And I've used it literally hundreds of times. Let me just make sure this is popping up here. And so it's called plus delta. And what's really good about the plus delta strategy is that it celebrates success before you start looking at what next. Can people see my screen or no? Yeah.
Not yet, Hugh.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Let's pop it in. So I'll just speak about it before we get the screen going. So okay, well, it doesn't matter. It's not coming up. But it's very simple. Take a flip chart, draw a line down the middle, plus on one side, delta on the other side, delta meaning change. And what's really helpful, by the way, is if you're the leader, that you give the felt pen to somebody else. So let somebody else actually get up there so it's less biased. You're not the one that's actually listening and recording what you hear. And you just simply ask people to talk about and share, okay, what's been working? So since we met last quarter, a quarter ago, what's been working this year? What's been working the last month? What's been working? And it could be within the topic category you're speaking about, communication, whatever, growth, profit, whatever, or it could be in general. So you make this nice long list on the left-hand side, and you keep encouraging people to share anything they want to celebrate, anything they recognize, anything that's been improved. They might say, oh, having this person that joined the team has been fantastic. Or the fact that we got this, we resolved this issue with a client group, or the fact that we did this. So you get this nice long list on the left-hand side and you say, okay, great. Now let's go to the right-hand side. What could be changed, improved? And the simple, catchphrase is start, stop, change, right? So what could be stopped? What could be started? What could be changed? Start, stop, change. And now they make a list on the right-hand side, and they start talking about, well, we're still, our meetings run late. The meeting, we don't have agendas in our meetings, or there's still, the projects are too big, or we're running overtime on this. So it's miscellaneous, and that's okay because it's coming from them. So again, someone else is standing up there with the felt pen. Your whole group, including yourself, are sharing on the right-hand side. And then the third step is you say, okay, well, how do we tackle this? So we can't take this all on, but what would be, say, the priorities? What would be, if we were to pick 3, what would they be? And then to move to small wins. So then what would be a small win that would get that flywheel started? So what I love about this process is it doesn't take very long, but what it does is it starts with a celebration, and then it moves to what could be start, stop, change, improved, and then it moves to what's a small win. And you could use this as a format for the entire meeting, or you could use it as a kickoff for your meeting. And in fact, you could even do it about a specific topic. For example, often I've encouraged leaders to use this about the meeting itself, about how we meet. So let's do a plus delta about how we meet, or let's do a plus delta about how we project plan, or how we budget, or how we hire, or how we onboard. Like, you can do it for any specific little topic, or you could do it as a general exercise for the entire strat planning process.
Yeah, excellent. There's a version of that I use with when I'm working with leadership teams. It's a trust building exercise, and it takes a lot of courage because I hate it when it happens to me. Is you go around, have your team in a group, in a circle, and they get, the most junior person gets to go first, and you have to, and they go against, I say against, that's not fair, but the first person up is the leader. And they first off, you go around the room and you say something, what is something that, a net thing that Steve brings to making this a high impact team? And it's great because everybody strokes you, right? Oh, you're a good guy, you're trusted, he buys coffee, brings donuts, blah, blah, blah. But then the next step is, what's a net takeaway negative that this person brings to the effectiveness of the group?
Mm-hmm.
And it's super powerful because people start telling you stuff that you don't really want to hear. You probably, if you're the most even remotely self-reflective and honest with yourself, there's truth to it. And then you go around but you do it for everybody in the room in reverse order of seniority. So the leader's up first, the second person's up, and then the leader gets to do something similar thing to everybody, right? And it's a very powerful exercise similar to you. And then you do the small wins. Okay, so I give you permission. If I touch you off in a sentence, I give you permission to call me out in the next meeting if I do that. And you start creating accountability around some of these issues. But it takes a spine of steel because it hurts. It could be pretty raw sometimes, but it's honesty, right? So from that becomes trust, becomes accountability, and then you get results, Nicole, or anybody that wants. If you're a follower of Patrick Lencioni, it's sort of his model of the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Mm-hmm. So I'd be curious about people on the call, if you were thinking about, let's say personally, what would be one thing in your personal life that you have as a ambition for 2024? What would be that? One or two things personally. So is there a hobby you've been neglecting you want to get back to? Is there a big trip you're planning? Is there something for your physical health that you want to achieve? Like, I'm just curious, what would that be?
Oh, Italy. Nice. That was quick, John. He was
Jake's
typing it before you
slow,
finished your
okay.
sentence.
It's slow.
It's right here, Stephen. It's right there. Every day I look in the mirror, I see it.
Yeah,
How
nice.
about, let's see, Andrew, Alicia,
Yeah,
Nicole?
for me, Hugh, it's there's a few things, but there's certain physical goals that I find when I'm at kind of my physical when I'm physically happy and I'm hitting certain benchmarks,
Yeah,
I'm just performing better in all parts of my life. So definitely more fitness related. And that I think will help recenter me to be happier in other parts of my life. So there's certain weights to hit and with certain exercises, certain poses to be able to hit with calisthenics. So that's kind of my goals to get back into that mindset. I've fallen far from it, so I want to get back to it.
okay, can I ask you a question about that, Andrew?
Sure.
Okay, what gets in the way?
I find what gets in the way is competing demands. I find, for example, if I'm really busy at work, I find when I have my time available in the day to work out, I'm too tired or I make
Yeah.
excuses. You mentioned earlier, I'll push pause on this for now. Next week, I'm on
Yeah.
it. And then it
Yeah.
just next week turns into like 2 years.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
sure.
it's finding the energy in the day to be able to do it and not prioritizing it, I think, is what gets in the way.
And yet what you started off by saying was you feel amazing when you do it, right?
100%.
I
It's
totally get, and
foundational.
I totally feel the same way. Like, to me, there's nothing better than coming back from a workout. And for me, I always think, oh wow, an hour would be perfect. Like an hour at the gym, an hour running, an hour. And the reality is, I can actually get the same feeling with 15 minutes sometimes. But what doesn't work is when I miss it. And so, can I offer you a couple suggestions? Just simple.
Please. Yeah, I'd love to
Okay.
hear them.
All right. So first of all, start inventing shorter duration workouts that you can do even when you're exhausted. Like, even if you're exhausted, you can still do this 15-minute workout and it feels great. And make it as convenient as possible. Like, maybe it's just simply getting down on the roller and doing some stretches. Okay, in 15 minutes, I'm out of there. And then secondly is to record it. So I have this routine I've been doing for a dozen years at least, is I go find a realtor's calendar every year in January, and I record every single frickin' workout. And I've been doing it for years and years. And I don't do it because I ever want to read that again. It's because it's my accountability. And so I have a goal for every month for how many total hours, but I don't care if it was a bunch of 15-minute chunks or if it was 2-hour workout. I just want to see how many hours, right? So my average is 1 hour a day. That's what I want to average out to. And if I missed a day or 2 days, it doesn't matter if I average. So I would encourage those two things. So create different duration lengths and have them all figured out in your head. So you don't have to think about it. Like, what exactly I do for 15 minutes, what do I do for 30 minutes, etc. And then record it.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
have it super convenient, have it all set. So there's no, remove all the resistance. That's what you got to do. Remove resistance.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks. I appreciate that. And I feel one of the things too that I've kind of started to implement is, to your point about the shorter durations, it's kind of a take on that where I'm trying to combine things. So, for example, another thing I like to do is watch movies,
Yeah.
and that's a good stress relief. But I set up a TV downstairs in the gym in the house here, and I can watch a movie while running on the treadmill. And
Yeah.
then I kind of combine both, so I'm doing two
Yeah.
things at once, and I find that I kind of I'm checking both boxes in my head, and then
Yeah.
I'm feeling better the next or after that, and that corresponds to the next day. So thanks for and
Yeah.
documenting too. I really like that as well because it holds you accountable, but also if you're trying to make progress towards a goal, you're not like, it's like, how much did I deadlift 2 weeks ago? Well, it's
Totally.
noted and I can track that. And then it's like, okay, I hit this amount last week. I better be trying to strive for at least that or higher. So, yeah,
Yes.
Very good. Good man.
thanks.
Yeah, good man. Yeah. That's good.
Alicia, Caroline, Devin, you got anything?
I want to hear from Alicia. Alicia, what would be a big thing for 2024?
I have a few goals for 2024. We're going to be building a lake house, so that's like a huge goal for us and a huge project, and looking forward to that. So I think that's the big one.
We're looking forward to you building the lake house.
Yeah,
That's big, Alicia.
yeah. So, if I could, Steve, you okay if I share a couple of kind of
Yeah, we're at your
right? So, whenever I'm presenting, I usually include something around how we think, right? Because as you all know, and we've already talked about this, we're really quick to sort of come up with ideas, but often we're held back because of the way that we think. And there's a law called Hebb's law, H-E-B-B, Hebb's law, and you've all heard this before. And it is that neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons that fire together wire together. And the analogy I use from my days as a river guide and a whitewater kayaker is that's how rivers run. So in our brain, it's like a whole series of rivers, and the rivers flow downstream, and they flow down the same stream they've always flowed down, right? And so Hebb's law is neurons that fire together, wired together. So if you think about your brain as a series of all these circuitries that are firing together and wiring together, what that suggests is not only will your brain love to take the path of least resistance, which is, oh, I'm exhausted, I don't have enough time, I'm going to go do this. That's the path of least resistance. It also suggests you can actually make a new path. That's the cool part. You see? So Andrew, for example, you say to yourself, well, listen, man, I got this movie I want to go watch. Great. Fire it up, get on the treadmill. That's the way I do it. That's how I watch movies, you see? And so as soon as you start firing in the same pattern, the brain starts wiring. And this is this whole concept of habits, which is that it doesn't take 21 days to make a new habit. It takes firing over and over and over again until you don't have to think about it. That's how long it takes to make a habit. And that might take 2 days, or it might take 2 months. It's all about firing in a new way so that you then wire in a new way. And that to me is exciting. This is this whole idea that if you think differently, you can actually behave differently. And, you know, we see these extraordinary athletes or amazing business people or brilliant leaders or brilliant parents. And we ask ourselves, well, how is it that they're that way? They look the same as me, right? They're the same age as me. We have the same education. We grew up in the same city. It's because they fire differently than we do. And I think that, you know, the beauty is that we can do that anytime. The dark side of that is we often wait for too long, you know, and we have all these things that we magically start thinking about when we're in our 80s, because we're full of, you know, we're full of nostalgia and we want to reach out to everybody. But the reality is we can do that in any age. We start wanting to take care of ourselves when our body lets us, you know, when our body starts getting out of shape. Well, we can do that at any time. And so I think what's exciting about moving forward into a new year is to look at our life and say, well, where is it that I'm firing in the wrong way? And how can I fire differently? And like the idea of writing down my workouts on a calendar actually gets me to fire differently, because I start thinking, I really want to write that down on the calendar. I want to write that on the calendar. So that means I want to go do that workout so I can write it on the calendar. And that simple act, like literally, Andrew, I have come home and an hour later, I've had my smoothie, I'm sitting down to read a book and I go, damn it, I forgot to write it on the calendar. And I go downstairs and I write it on the calendar because it's become so important to me. Because if I keep writing it on the calendar, my brain now fires that that's actually a reward. It's so stupid, right? Like, how could writing a little thing on a calendar be a reward? But that's how my brain fires. And so it's just something really interesting to think about. You know, Steve Gates says that, or Bill Gates says, once said that people tend to overestimate how much they can get done in a day and underestimate what? What do they underestimate? How much you can get done in a year. We can have a completely different experience next year, but we have to start with what is it that we really want? Where are we really at? How do we create small wins? And most importantly, how is it we want to be thinking about it? How do we want to fire? Because every time we fire, you know, James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, he says, every action is a vote for the person you want to become. Every action is a vote for the person you want to become. And so when we fire differently, we act differently and we change our outcomes.
So,
It's kind of exciting.
yeah, Alicia, are you project managing your family doing this on your own? Are you a general or?
We are doing everything. Yeah.
So that's a big job. So how could you use some of the things you mentioned to help organize your thoughts as you go into this exercise?
Well, I can see that being important because like breaking it down into small pieces, because honestly, if I look at it all as one big chunk, it's overwhelming and it stresses me right out.
Should. That's reasonable, actually.
Right. So breaking it down and kind of going step by step and also looking at what's in our control and what's not. So, you know, even something like interest rates right now, obviously we can't control what those are. And when we bought our lot, it was very different economic climate than it is now, right? So yeah, so I kind of have to just compartmentalize a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember one time one of my employees when I was still with Red Cross came to me and she was stressed out. I thought she was about to leave on like long-term disability or something. She was in a bad place. And the problem was she was doing all of these workshops. And I said, well, what's the problem? Tell me what, in your own word, what the problem is. And she walked through it a couple of times. And I said, okay, let's do this. There's whatever it was. She's only was being paid only because she was being paid for 35 hours in a work week. Each workshop was an hour and a half or something like that. And she was trying to do 10 a week, 2 a day. So that's 15 hours. She hasn't driven to the workshop location yet. She hasn't even gone to the bathroom once during the day. And soon 35 hours is completely
Wow.
gone, right? And no wonder she was stressed out because she was stressing herself out. So what we did was, okay, what's a reasonable thing to accomplish, right? It's not 15 in the week, it's whatever, 7 or 8.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
3.
Or, yeah, maybe 3, yeah. But there's a balance in that. So if you break it down into, as you mentioned, Alicia, if you start breaking it down and, okay, what do we have to get done? Okay, a year from now, we want this house up, but what do I have to do this month to get to? Because yeah, you'll just completely, and I always find personally, this is I know I'm pretty self-aware. If I don't have much going on, if I'm not busy, which luckily I have Andrew and Alicia and Jake to keep me a little busier in some of my other stuff. But if I'm not busy, I don't get anything done.
Right. Yeah.
My rivers in my head get dammed up and just stop flowing like a swamp, right? But if I'm busy, I can do a million things.
Mhm. That's great. So then all you have to do is create that environment, right?
Yeah.
Just create that environment so you feel busy.
Yeah.
Feel engaged.
Alicia, you had something that you were saying there, sorry.
Well, that's okay. I was just going to ask a question. I kind of put it in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
For sometimes I think, you know, small wins are great, right? For me, though, I also find there's value and importance with taking a big step and you know, really challenging oneself. So when you were talking about like creating that neuroplasticity really within the brain, creating those new pathways, like I kind of struggle because I think sometimes the easiest way isn't always the best way. And maybe we should push ourselves and challenge ourselves and do the hard route so that we can rewire and learn that neuroplasticity for that direction. But how do you find the balance? Because that can also be very frustrating in, not seeing that quick win and having to put in that additional time and effort to get there.
Yeah, I used to joke, it's a great question, Lisa. I used to joke that people in January sign up for a gym membership for 6 months. They go to the gym once, get a good sweat on, go back in the change rooms, and they look in the mirror and they don't see any change, so they quit, right? It's great to have the ambition of getting super fit and maybe building your muscle or losing weight or building your VO2 max or something, but you're not going to see change right away. So I think, to me, it's always a balance game. So I want to have the big win. I want to have the big ambition. I want to be driven. I want to have things that I'm excited about doing, but I also need to recognize it's going to happen with small steps, and the ROI on those small steps won't be that obvious at first. Right? It's like compound interest, you put a little bit of money in every month, etc. Or losing weight, you got to go and do whatever it is you're going to do to start losing that weight or whatever. So I think that, I think it's about both. You got to go build that cabin by the lake, but you're not going to build it in a weekend. You're going to, first of all, go find out someone that can make the plans for you or whatever it is, that first step. And it's going to seem pretty small,
And I think, sorry, Hugh,
yeah.
I think too, his perspective, I recall working was a mid-sized pipeline company based here in Calgary. And they were putting, it was $1 billion investment into a facility up in Strathcona County up by Edmonton. Excuse me. And we did a survey. The executives were like 85% confident that they could bring this project in on time, on budget, but the employees were 25% confident it would come in on time.
Wow.
Budget. And so, there's this discrepancy. So how do you close the gap? Like, what are they seeing? And it goes maybe even to what Nicole was asking about earlier, right? It's like these people have seen this before. I think, Alicia, you and I were talking about There Be Dragons, right? When we as leaders, even in our own minds, we see this thing where we want to go to, and we've thought about it a lot. Maybe it's losing weight, but maybe it's building $1 billion project. And we see nothing but sunshine and roses and cats sleeping with dogs and only rains on the golf course at night. And that, is beautiful. It's utopia. But everyone else is going, holy shit. All they see is that old fashioned map where off in the corner is the gray area that says There Be Dragons.
Right.
Because they've been there. They've seen all of the things that trip us up as we go along, either as an organization or as individuals. So I think, to Hugh's point, it's how do we get through the There Be Dragons part to the other side through a series of incremental steps that maybe we can retrain our brain so the river runs differently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because I think, and again, if I revert back to loop back to what we were talking about earlier about, self-improvement books and a lot of the modern literature on how to get things done, it's a bit utopian because it sort of suggests that you're working in isolation. It's like you're in this vacuum and all you got to do is come up with a big vision and suddenly you start marching towards it. But life is in the way. And also what's in the way is our current wiring. So I think that small wins is really, to me, really a great concept because what it says to me is that I know now how to measure progress is through small wins. And so if I create a small win, I will get progress. And I just have to have faith that that's going to go in the right direction. I mean, I've been working on some projects now for 4 years that only now I'm starting to see that actually the fruits of our labor. But that there was many times there where I thought we were off the rails, but I just kept looking for, okay, what's one thing I can do with this committee member, with this board of directors, with this consultant, with this whatever, so that we can get small wins. And I think that the risk that we have when we're starting to plan ahead is that we try to make things too complicated. And the reality is that the basic fundamentals have got to be there. What is it we're trying to create? When do we want to have it? And how are we going to go and get it? And then to go and create those small wins.
Mhm. Well, another military adage is everybody, and Mike Tyson phrased it much better, was everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth.
Right.
So if you're aware of where you want to end up, what do you want it to look like in the future? And then and in military, the adage is, everybody has a plan until first contact with the enemy, and their job is to stop you. So we need to always, it's not like this commandments 11 through 15 and granted at the end of the thing. It's like, okay, this is the awareness of, as you mentioned earlier, his model was being aware where you want to be, and then you can make those adjustments as you go along by incremental steps. So anybody, it's been wonderful. It's about 8 past the hour and we've scheduled these till 1/4 past. So I just want to make sure everybody has had an opportunity. Andrew is out doing his 15-minute workout right now with Rusty the
Nice.
dog.
Yeah, I had to take him out. He was crying at the door. So yeah, my 15 minutes. This isn't cardio, I would say. He moves at a very slow pace.
But
you need to get a faster dog.
does anybody, Devin, I don't know if you can talk. I know if anybody else has something you wanted to ask or participate in. I know, Devin, you had your hopes for this year was to get to BC to visit family. So I don't know if this, this higher level thinking can certainly apply to, personal goals and life objectives like that too. Like, what are the things that might stop you? How do you make things and put things in place to help you move through that?
Well, Steve, to be honest, it's been a tough year this year all around. So, just taking in everything and thinking of ways where I can make the small changes, both in work and in life, to create a more equal balance to make things more open and available to work out.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's what, as they say, life isn't easy, and everybody has their own things going on in it, right? So I think we too need just to be aware of the people around us. A friend of mine always said, you never know what's going on behind a closed door, and the people that you think have all their ducks in a row. There's a meme going around now about ducks in a row, like 2 of them can't swim and one's a swan. So, our lives are always complicated, but I think too, to be able to step back a little bit and break it down into those incremental steps. And I even know, like, for everyone on the call that's leading organizations, it's full of people, and people are complex at the best of times. And so I think, go ahead, Devin.
I was going to say, well, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Hugh? We're coming up towards the end here. Do you have anything?
Yeah, so I was speaking with a supervisor yesterday who works at a large industrial plant, lots of employees, lots of problems, lots of issues. And it was interesting to me, as sophisticated as the operation was and as big as the company is and as many people as they have involved, and maybe it's just because that's what I look for, but how universal the problems were. It came down to planning, distractions, goal setting, priorities, procrastination, like all that human stuff, right? The machines were all working pretty well, but the humans are involved, right? And it's not that, we all have, we're all faulty, or that, that this has to be the way it always is, but it just always surprises me how little things can make a huge difference, even in the most sophisticated company, the biggest company. You could look at all of these multinationals or billion-dollar organizations, and it's still people struggling with the same stuff, which is what goes on in our head and then how that translates into action. And I think that, like I shared that quote by Lily Tomlin, right? The road to success is always under construction. And I think it's true, but it's all about continuing to improve on it. That's, to me, what gets exciting. Is we're never going to be perfect, but how do I improve on it? So how is it next year? I just look for a better way to think about a problem that keeps reoccurring. And then a better way to act with something that I typically procrastinate about. And then a better way to celebrate something that I ignore. So how can I just keep doing that a little better, a little bit better, a little bit better, with the ambition and the hope that that actually creates progress. And because life is going to keep on going on, and it's, what the choice I get is how do I behave in that moment?
Yeah. So that was terrific, Hugh. So here's the number one thing I took away from Hugh from 15 years ago or whatever it was on that top of that COP hill and here in Calgary was managing your inbox by having a CC folder that and put a rule on your Outlook that all CC emails went into that folder. And I work for a cover your ass organization, and everybody and their dog was CC'd on everything. And I don't know how many hours and hours that one thing, amongst other things that Hugh said that day, that gave me time to think and be and to be more effective as a person and as a leader. And so there's lots of ways of doing it. If you want to reach out, I'm sure to either to Hugh or I'd be happy to share the way to do that. But just have to make sure everybody knows that if they CC you, that you're not going to read it till maybe next week. In fact, I remember one time getting a phone call from the chief operating officer of the organization saying, "I know you don't read CC emails, but you should read this one." I said, "Okay, no problem. Thanks for the heads up." So listen, everybody, it's 1:15. This has been great. Hugh, thank you very much. Hugh is a great
pleasure,
friend and a
Steve.
great person, and a wonderful mind and a wonderful participant in life. And I'm glad to walk beside him for some time. And to all of you, thank you very much for your time. And those who will be listening in the future, thank you for participating. I wish you nothing but the best over the holiday seasons. And for 2024, I know not all of us have a roadmap that's perfectly lined up, but I hope that we've helped you try to map it out a wee bit for you and help break it down so that you can be successful.
Right. Nice to meet everyone. Merry Christmas.
Thanks.
Merry Christmas,
Thank you.
everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, everybody. Take care.
Bye.